Training camp battles at tight end are going to be absolutely intriguing. Is it going to be the veterans, Logan Thomas and Eric Stauber? Is it going to be the young guys, Cameron Latu and Braden Willis? Is it going to be somebody coming out of nowhere like Mason Klein? We're going to talk all about those training camp battles, who has the upper hand, and who is potentially going to be on this 49ers 53-man roster when all the smoke has settled. All that and more in this episode of 49ers Cutback.
From the alley-oops at Kezar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way. From off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. Hope you all are enjoying a happy 4th of July. It's going to be a fun one because there's going to be some battles in this episode about the tight end position. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening to audio platform 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right up to all the top fights in the UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker. Or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online, the game starts here. It's an interesting position because the 49ers have had some mainstays for a while. It was Ross Dwelley for a long time. Basically, since Kyle Shanahan came to San Francisco, there's been some consistency. George Kittle is on this roster since 2017, and Ross Dwelley has been around right after that. So that's been the case with the tight end room. And there's been conversations of year in and year out if Ross Dwelley is that guy, if Ross Dwelley is a legitimate tight end too. And the 49ers have tried to address the position in a variety of different ways, whether that was drafting Charlie Warner or that was having guys like Garrett Selleck or bringing in guys off the street like McCole Pruitt or even signing Jordan Reed, who I believe Kyle Shanahan thought was going to put them over the top in 2020 after that loss in 2019 in the Super Bowl. The 49ers have been trying to address the tight end position for a while, and we've had battles where we thought, hey, maybe this time we'll get tight end too, but it's never happened. You look at Charlie Warner last year, he was a solid blocker. I mean, Charlie Warner is one of the better blocking tight ends in the whole league. I would say he's top 10, if not top 5. But when you look at his receiving numbers, 3 catches for 32 yards, that doesn't exactly scare the defense at all. So when you're in your 22 or 12 personnel, when you have 2 tight ends on the field, you only fear one of those tight ends, and that's George Kittle, which means you can still go ahead and keep your personnel groupings pretty generic. You can cover Charlie Warner with a linebacker or a safety. You don't have to get creative. So that ends up hurting the 49ers in their ability to get something else done in the passing game. So 49ers are making an effort to turn over the position. Some of the reason why is Charlie Warner left. He got a pretty good deal with Atlanta, and then it wasn't too long later, Ross Dwelley left as well. Atlanta Falcons and that new regime apparently really like the 49ers tight ends to play a more traditional role behind Kyle Pitts. But the 49ers were going to have to adjust the position, and we know 49ers started looking at the position last year. Last year, the draft 2023 was very rich with tight end. And we all thought 49ers might hit 2 tight ends in that draft and double up at the position, and they did. In the 3rd round, they got Cameron Latu, tight end out of Alabama, 6'5", 250 pounds, can run, got athleticism, had translated from playing defensive end at Alabama to tight end. So we knew there was a progress that was going to have to be made to be the tight end in the NFL that you were going to get. But then also in the 7th round, they got Braden Willis, tight end out of Oklahoma, who played in a very good offense, but looked like a pretty good blocker as well. So 49ers addressed it there, but they weren't done in free agency. They, of course, tried to make some other moves, tried to sign a restricted free agent out of Detroit. That didn't work. But then went and got Eric Saubert, a guy that's been around the league for a long time. Came out in the same draft as George Kittle, 2017, drafted in the 5th round. And he has come in and he's been all around, been in a bunch of different teams. So the 49ers brought in him as a veteran. But then they struck on Logan Thomas. And Logan Thomas started for the Washington Commanders over the last 3 seasons. And last year had himself one heck of a year as he had 55 catches for 496 yards and 4 touchdowns. A 10-year veteran, he's 32 years old. Eric Saubert's 30 years old. Those guys on the other end. Cameron Latu, Braden Willis, they're on the younger end. You've got kind of a nice division of players here in the group. Now you throw in some guys who are undrafted. You got Jake Tonges. He's been in the league for 2 years now, was with the Chicago Bears. They turned him into a fullback in his rookie season. He actually made the initial 53-man roster and played in 4 games. So a little bit of position versatility for Jake Tonges. Could be tight end. I've heard he's bulked up. He used to play at 240, and the rumors are he's up to like close to 260 pounds. So Jake Tonges making his best effort, coming right out of the 49ers backyard, Cal Berkeley. And so he's going to be in the mix. And then also 49ers new undrafted free agent Mason Pline. So here you got these guys that are going to make the team potentially. Now, how exactly will the 49ers go? Will they go 3 tight ends? Will they go 4 tight ends? I think that is something that can be really discussed another day because it's going to be difficult to figure out the overall makeup of the 49ers roster. We've heard Kyle Shanahan talk about potentially keeping 6 wide receivers. 6 wide receivers, 9 offensive linemen, 5 running backs, 3 quarterbacks would make it really difficult to keep 4 tight ends. Now, if you only keep 2 quarterbacks, potentially you could keep 4. So we'll keep that in mind. Potentially 4 of these tight ends could be in play to make the 49ers initial 53-man roster and help this football team out. And that might be music to the ears of a guy like Cameron Latu or Braden Willis, who are going to be in an absolute battle to make this roster. One guy we don't have to talk about at all is the leader in the clubhouse, George Kittle. George Kittle is tight end 1. There's no questions about it. And thank God we got George Kittle, the all-pro who just continues to put out good numbers. Last year, he's dealing with a core injury. No worries. George Kittle's going to get over 1,000 yards, the only tight end in the NFL with over 1,000 yards receiving in 2023. He's not slowing down. He's continuing to produce at a high level. And since Brock Purdy took over in 2022, George Kittle's had a tremendous amount of success. They hook up a lot for big, explosive touchdowns. So, to me, George Kittle sets the tone for the tight end room. Logan Thomas said that when he went to tight end U, and it was good to see some of these guys at tight end U looking to get better and looking to continue to build relationships with George Kittle, learn nuances of the game. It's a good avenue. But how exactly does this training camp battle happen? Now, my belief right now is that you're looking at Logan Thomas as tight end 2. And I know Kyle Shanahan said that he brought him in to compete. And I've heard others talk about on podcasts and stuff that they don't believe Logan Thomas is tight end 2, that it's basically George Kittle and a bunch of guys. And I think that I can't really agree with that because your problem is Logan Thomas has proven in his 10 years being in the league that he's a starting caliber tight end. And when you go out and you start all the games you started in the NFL and you produce over 50 catches, nearly 500 yards and 4 touchdowns, you're a legitimate threat at tight end. And now you're stepping in to be tight end 2. Who exactly on the 49ers behind George Kittle has illustrated those type of skills, those type of numbers? No one. His numbers would rival Charlie Warner, Ross Dwelly, their entire career combined. They wouldn't reach what Logan Thomas did last season. That's how it is with all these guys, unproven at every single one of the other tight end positions. Eric Sauber is probably the most proven, and even then, last year, he only had 3 catches. So it's not like there's a lot of production coming from the other tight ends in the room. I think Logan Thomas is pretty secure. But it could come down to a competition between Logan Thomas and Eric Sauber because you have veterans, right? You probably want to keep your young players if possible. But when you look at the two, there's a stark contrast between the two of them if you're trying to compare. You got Logan Thomas, who catches the ball very well, 55 catches. He's a big physical athletic guy who used to play quarterback in college. understands concepts, understands zone coverage, really good at sitting down in zones, but has the athletic ability to make something happen after the catch, but then has a 6'6", 250 plus pound frame that can go up and get the football. He's also not afraid to take contact over the middle of the field, which are prerequisites for playing receiver in San Francisco, or in this case, playing tight end. So Logan Thomas is hard to compare to Saubert because that's not who Eric Saubert is. Eric Saubert is a guy that's going to be a good blocker who's going to understand what his roles are. Think of him more of the Charlie Warner role. So comparing him to Logan Thomas is not exactly an apples to apples comparison. Here's the issue, though. They're the two guys that are over 30 years old. You have George Kittle. He's off on his own. And then you have these two guys that are the veterans. You're probably only going to keep one of the veterans unless you decide that you're keeping 5 tight ends. You're not going to keep 5 tight ends. That doesn't make any sense for your football team. So one of these guys potentially have to go. You know what my feelings are about Logan Thomas. So maybe Eric Saubert's competition with Logan Thomas doesn't make any sense. Maybe you want to compare Logan Thomas more to Cameron Latu. Cameron Latu's built as a more athletic, 6'5", 245-pound tight end that can run and catch the ball. Now, we know we haven't seen the best Cameron Latu that he could possibly offer this football team. Just looking at training camp last year, and I did go to training camp and watch Cameron Latu play. I saw the drops, but that wasn't all I saw. In fact, that wasn't the most concerning thing to me. What I saw was a player that looked confused, looked like a player that wasn't playing fast because he was trying to understand what his job was, what his role was, and he wasn't really translating to the NFL game yet. And why is that? Well, there's a lot to be able to understand. You're talking about a guy that went from playing defensive line to playing tight end in Alabama, but I guarantee you the offense at Alabama is way less complicated than the offense for the San Francisco 49ers because there's a lot less movement. There's a lot less route concepts. There's a lot less blocking. And so he had to figure out all these things, remember the snap count, get used to cadences. He had to make sure he was good with checks and what was plays they were going to can and what plays they were going to run. There was just too much for Cameron Latu last season. But now he spent all the entire year in meeting rooms learning the 49ers offense, feeling comfortable with the verbiage, understanding key terms, knowing when he's supposed to go in motion. And now he can hopefully take that mental aspect and apply it to the physical. Because when you're thinking too much as an athlete, especially when you're playing football, then you're not being able to actually play free and make the plays you need to make. Most mistakes are happening because players are thinking. They're thinking and not reacting. And that's what happened to Cameron Latu last year. That's why he started having the drops, because he was struggling with the overall concept of understanding what he was supposed to do within the offense. Even when he's running his routes, he's trying to remember the steps. He's trying to remember to do things right, to use the right leverage. There was a lot that was put on Cameron Latu. And we do know transition from tight end in college to tight end in the NFL is a difficult transition. And Cameron Latu struggled with that last year. So how do I put Cameron Latu going into year 2 with no production, who spent the entire year on the IR against a guy like Logan Thomas? I don't think you can. I don't think that even though that they would play the same type of role, that is going to be an actual competition. The competition for that position might come down to Cameron Latu versus Braden Willis. Which young guy do you keep? You keep Cameron Latu, who has more upside, or do you keep Braden Willis, who's right now the more balanced tight end? Also, he was on your 53-man roster all year. He was a pretty good blocker. Now, he didn't do anything when it came to receiving, but we've seen him be able to catch the football. He caught some passes in training camp last year in the preseason, and then when he got his opportunities blocking, he did okay. I think there's improvement still to come there. So do you want to compare veteran to veteran and rookie to rookie, or does it start mix matching? And when do you throw in Mason Pline? When do you throw in Jake Tongas? There are some that want to throw Mason Pline right into the middle of this competition and expect an undrafted free agent who translated from playing college basketball to playing football and throw him straight into the mix and think that he's going to compete with Cameron Latu and Braden Willis. And I think he's going to get opportunities. But I've seen tight ends come in as undrafted free agents for the 49ers and never really work out the way that you're hoping. Now he's doing his best. He's putting his best foot forward. He shows up to tight end U. He's making sure he's learning. He's got his body under control. He looks like an athletic, big physical freak who could potentially help this 49ers football team. But I don't know exactly where he's going to fit in the mix. How many opportunities is he going to get as tight end 5, tight end 6 to actually make an impact in practice? I think that's going to be the big problem. If Cameron Latu's healthy, that's the thing. You've got plenty of talent out there at training camp getting reps. It goes George Kittle, then it's going to go Logan Thomas. Then after that, it's probably going to go Braden Willis or Eric Saubert, and then Cameron Latu. So even Latu's going to battle to get reps, but they want to see Cameron Latu do it. They want to see if that third-round pick is going to be able to make the plays he couldn't make last year. So this is a very complicated tight end discussion because this is a training camp battle that's absolutely fantastic. Either way, the 49ers are going to have potentially a better tight end room than they had in 2023. And I think that's good news. You want to improve rooms. This is one of those rooms with the signing of Logan Thomas and the drafting of Latu and Braden Willis, the signing of Eric Saubert, that you feel like, hey, the tight end room looks a little bit better than it did in 2023. So how exactly does this thing work out? Well, I think Cameron Latu, number one, has to prove that he's very comfortable with playing the tight end position. He has to look absolutely different to even be a part of this training camp battle. And he's got to prove a lot of things, not just where to line up, when to go in motion. He's got to catch the football. He's got to block. We didn't see him block at a high level last year in the preseason, so that's something he's going to have to do. The one thing that helps Cameron Latu is last year in that last preseason game, Cameron Latu made some plays. Cameron Latu scored a touchdown. Cameron Latu made some catches. And it was like, okay, maybe he's starting to get an idea. Maybe he's starting to figure this thing out. But we know the 49ers have been willing to keep 4 tight ends before. In 2022, they wanted to make sure they could keep their guys, so they kept George Kittle, they kept Charlie Warner, they kept Ross Dwelley, and then eventually they brought in Tyler Kroft. They had cut him and brought him back once they made some other roster moves. 4 guys. But Charlie Warner was the young guy in that situation. Now, who's the young guy in the situation? A guy like Cameron Latu, a guy like Braden Willis. So the 49ers keep 4 tight ends. The likelihood is 2 of them are going to be the young players, Cameron Latu and Braden Willis, which leaves potentially Eric Saubert out. And Eric Saubert's a good player. As far as blocking, I think he's significant in that area. I just don't think he has enough receiving ability to really be able to help this football team. Because if you keep him and he's playing significant snaps for you at tight end, you're running into the same problems you had beforehand with Charlie Warner. He's out there making the blocks in the run game, but there's no fear of what he's going to do against you when you're playing defense. There's no personnel change that's going to make things difficult. You run 12 personnel, you have McCaffrey back there, you have 2 tight ends on the field, you're running an ace formation, you put both guys, one on each side, George Kittle on one side, Eric Saubert on the other. I'm not sure that that's making any defense worry about you. They're not having to bring a safety up on you in the box. They're not having to worry about you in coverage. So if that's the case, it really doesn't benefit the 49ers a whole lot. You'd rather have a guy that can block well with some receiving upside, a guy like Braden Willis. And that could be an interesting matchup and an interesting competition, and it might come down to Braden Willis versus Eric Saubert. Because Braden Willis has been thought about a guy that has tremendous blocking upside, a guy that could potentially be able to block really well and then also be able to catch the football. Because what we saw at Oklahoma was a tight end that could make plays in the open field. A tight end that, when you got the ball in his hands, could get something done. And then what we saw in training camp in the preseason was a guy that looked like he was a transitional blocker who got better every single day. Who knows how much better he got during the year as he continued to get reps and get practice. And now he's going to have a full offseason and training camp. But if Braden Willis can show, and it was the same thing last year with him and Charlie Warner, and Warner's just so good at a blocker, it was almost unfair. But if Braden Willis can show that he's a equivalent blocker to Eric Saubert, he makes this team over Saubert. And there's really no recourse for Saubert to get on this team. because you have a young guy with way more receiving upside. Braden Willis could definitely catch the ball and make something happen in the open field compared to Saubert. So Saubert's going to catch the ball, and he's going down somewhere right around where he caught it. He's more of a possession tight end. So Braden Willis's ability in the receiving game could set him apart in that matchup. And that's what you start looking at, is the certain matchups that could play huge dividends. And if the 49ers want to keep Braden Willis, which I believe they do, they're going to give him every opportunity to potentially beat out a guy like Saubert. So 30 years old versus a guy like Braden Willis, who just came into the league with more upside, more athletic ability. To me, this is kind of a no-brainer as long as Braden Willis can live up to expectations. And that's the key. Right now, we don't know what expectations are going to be for a guy like Cameron Latu or Braden Willis. We know what expectations we had for them when they came out of the draft, but I think you have to somewhat throw those out because we just don't know. They haven't got a lot of time on the field. Are they going to be upgrades over Ross Dwelley and Charlie Warner? We hope so. But I think right now it's safe to say that you're going to get Logan Thomas as tight end too. I think it's also safe to say that Cameron Latu or Braden Willis are going to make this team, one of them for sure, which means you're going to have one not. We discussed how Braden Willis could potentially beat out Eric Saubert, and that would be by proving you're a better blocker or an equivalent blocker. Because if you do so, then you make the team over him because you have more receiving upside. Well, what about Cameron Latu versus Eric Saubert? How exactly does he make the team over him? Well, he has to prove that he can block at all. And I'm not trying to be rude, but you just have to show it. We haven't seen it consistently yet, but you have to show that because Cameron Latu wasn't brought to the 49ers in that draft pick to be an excellent blocker. He was brought to be a guy that could win getting up the seam, a guy that could catch the ball in the open space, get upfield, and make something happen, to be a red zone threat. Those were things that Cameron Latu was brought in to do. He was brought in to be the better version of Ross Dwelley that could block and then could also catch the football, but catch the football first. They knew they had to develop him as a blocker. So Latu has to prove that he's no longer underwater, that he's no longer struggling with the system. He understands where he's supposed to be and when he's supposed to be there. And then he needs to go out and execute a little bit when it comes to blocking. You can't be an absolute liability as far as blocking. If you are, you can't be on the field. 49ers run the football. They run the football 49% of the time. That means you have to be able to block or you're not going to be out there. So Cameron Latu, he's got a lot to prove. But I think the best case scenario for the 49ers and for the fan base is that Cameron Latu and Braden Willis both come out and show up and show out. Put pressure on the San Francisco 49ers to keep both of them. Logan Thomas is going to make this team. I feel very confident, minus an injury, that Logan Thomas is going to be on this football team. And I think the main battle is going to come down to those three guys, Braden Willis, Cameron Latu, and Eric Saubert, battling for one, maybe two positions. Hopefully it's two so we can keep two guys. Maybe we can keep Willis and Latu. Maybe they're going to develop into the players we think. Well, what about those guys that I didn't mention and didn't talk about a whole lot? I talked about them just for a second. Jake Tongas, the guy with versatility to play tight end and fullback. This might be somebody the 49ers are looking at for maybe a potential down the road play, or even in case an injury occurs to Kyle Juszczyk during the season. You don't want to put that stress on a guy like Logan Thomas. You don't want to lose him when you're running 12 personnel. You don't want to put that stress on a guy like Cameron Latu or Braden Willis. Cameron Latu was struggling already. Braden Willis, he could handle that role, but Jake Tongas has already played fullback in the NFL. I think Jake Tongas and Mason Pline might be battling to see who makes the practice squad. And Pline's definitely got the athleticism, the physical height. Those things are going to be very enticing to the 49ers to see what they could eventually develop this young player into. Because if he could just take advantage of that height, 6'7", 260 pounds, former basketball player, there's got to be some sort of athleticism there. Now, the speed didn't really translate. He runs a 4.8, but when you're a big dude like that, 4.8, not so bad. So those two guys are uniquely different, yet they're battling for the same spot, potentially. And all the while, if Eric Saubert gets cut, it could be him on the practice squad. Who would you rather have? The veteran that you know you could plug and play when it comes to blocking, you could elevate if you're going into a game where you're going to heavy run the football, make Cameron Latu inactive, go with Saubert potentially. You could do that. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Mason Pline ends up on the practice squad. And I know that people think maybe he's going to be tied in too. And hey, if he shows up and he ends up making huge plays, being a big time tight end, I will absolutely love it. In fact, I want all these guys to succeed. It's just tough because you can't always succeed in the NFL, and sometimes the roster is just absolutely loaded. So Pline and Tongas have an uphill battle compared to everybody else. I think right now, Tongas' versatility actually gives him a potential advantage to being on the 49ers practice squad. To fill in for Kyle Juszczyk if there's an injury, if they continue to work on him and understanding the offense that way. Could also be a blocking tight end, could catch the ball a little bit. I think he's actually a fun player. I enjoyed watching his film. So it comes down to that. Is it the veteran Eric Saubert? Is it Braden Willis and Cameron Latu? I think right now, if I had to guess, 49ers are going to try to figure out a way to keep 4. Unless Cameron Latu shows up, and he's not that guy. Then they might go ahead and just move on. We've seen them do it before. Trey Sermon, TDP. Now, those guys were running backs. But if you have a bunch of talent and a stockpile of talent at the position, then sometimes you just have to move on. Hoping that's not the case, because I see upside with Cameron Latu. You see the athleticism, the physicality, the ability to be able to make some things happen, and that's what you want for your football team. The best situation for the 49ers, after everything is said and done, coming out and that 53-man roster being built, George Kittle, Logan Thomas, Braden Willis, and Cameron Latu being the 4 tight ends for your football team. If that's the case, you're optimistic about 2024. You're optimistic about 2025 and 2026 because Logan Thomas is on a 1-year deal. So when Logan Thomas moves on in 2025, hopefully you've got Cameron Latu and Braden Willis ready to step in just the way the 49ers intended when they were going through and making sure that they got the guy that they wanted to draft in the 2023 draft. Drafted guys with contrasting styles. Worked out for them before. Ambry Thomas, De'Amara Lenore, and De'Amara Lenore is the one that really got it done. They've done this before at several positions, and it's worked out for them. Hopefully, it'll work out for them again. I'm hoping that we're going to get a mixture of the 2 veterans, George Kittle and Logan Thomas, and the young guys, Cameron Latu and Braden Willis. Let me know in the comment section down below who you think is going to win this tight end battle. Do you think the young guys have a shot, like I said? Do you think Logan Thomas is for sure tight end too? I'm curious if you think that is the case, because that's what I'm presuming it to be. And then, what do you do with the extra tight ends, Eric Saubert, Mason Pline? You put those guys on the practice squad. Does Jake Tongas have an opportunity because he played fullback for the Chicago Bears for 4 games early on in his career? I'm really curious what you guys think. Please let me know in the comment section down below. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe. It's available on all audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.